My name is Brendan Banfield. I'm a federal agent. This is my house. There's somebody here. I shot him. But he stabbed her. She's bleeding. She got several marks on her neck. What do I do?
Fairfax County, Virginia. At 7:47 a.m., a call was made to the emergency services that barely lasted a second before then abruptly disconnecting. The operator tried to call back, however, unfortunately, there was no response. But then, 15 minutes later, the same phone number called again. He told the dispatcher that he had shot someone, that a man, a stranger, had broken into the house and then attacked his wife. And tragically, it was up for debate whether or not she was actually going to make it. And from that moment onwards, this story went from bad to terrible to outrageous. Hi folks, my name is Adrian, and today we're looking at a story that's got a lot of footage, a plot that is older than time itself, and some very interesting characters.
Drop the. Oh.
You see, it was in 2023 that an IRS agent named Brendan Banfield came home to find his wife in the process of being murdered, which, I'm gonna be honest with you, is likely the worst thing that you could ever discover. But the thing is, when detectives took a closer look at the story and tried to put all of the puzzle pieces together, they realized that quite a few things didn't make sense. And when they uncovered what actually happened to Christine, well, they were sick to their stomachs. You're gonna need a strong coffee for this one, folks, but before we begin, Coffeehouse Crime is all about strange and dark true crime stories, so if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and get comfortable. This is the case of Brendan Banfield. Welcome to Fairfax County, folks. Life here does feel quite orderly. It's the kind of place where you have quiet neighborhoods, trimmed lawns, and many federal jobs. In other words, it isn't really a place of poverty or desperation, but instead of comfort, security, and success. The kind of place where nothing violent is ever really supposed to happen. But, of course, sometimes the most unsettling crimes do exist in places like this. And on one cold winter morning, a frantic call to the emergency services immediately shattered that peace.
Fairfax County 911, where's your emergency?
I need help. There is my friend. She just was stuck in the night now. She's bleeding a lot. I don't know what to do anymore.
And what's your name and what's going on?
My name is Brendan Banfield. I'm a federal agent. This is my house. There's somebody here. I shot him. But he stabbed her. She's bleeding. She got several marks on her neck. What do I do?
Okay, so what I need you to do is apply direct pressure directly to where she's bleeding from, okay? Okay, and where is the person that was shot? Are they also in the house downstairs?
Yes.
Yeah, he's in the bedroom too.
On behalf of Brendan Banfield, his au pair, Juliana Perez Magales, had dialed 911. To everyone on the outside, it sounded like a home invasion in the worst possible way imaginable. Juliana was downstairs when she realized that a stranger was in the house and that this stranger was making his way upstairs to the master bedroom. Unsure of what to do, she then decided to call Brendan, who, lucky for her, was only down the road at a McDonald's. So, he returned home moments later, only then to realize that his wife, Christine, was still inside the property with this intruder. I think you better buckle up for this one, because this story gets so much worse. After barging his way upstairs, Brendan and Juliana then found his wife in the same room as the intruder. And there is one small detail here that responders learn quite quickly. That the couple's 4-year-old daughter is still actually inside the house with all of them. Now, thankfully, when emergency responders arrive, she is found downstairs in the basement, physically unharmed. However, what they would have to deal with upstairs was an entirely different story. And all they knew at this point is that there was a bleeding woman in the bedroom, a man who had been shot dead, and 2 other adults that were quite clearly ridden with panic.
Good. Still breathing.
Sorry?
Still breathing.
Still breathing?
Hey.
Do you want me to put her to watch a show or something?
If you just want to tell me quickly what happened.
I don't really know what happened. Everything happened too fast. I was going to take her to the zoo this morning.
Can you go with Officer Batani really quick?
Why don't you come with us?
Oh,
He has some stickers for you.
no, I saw this car. This is her car.
Are they both inside? Are they both inside?
Person, I guess.
You don't know who that? Do you know who the person is?
I have no idea. And then also his car called her to see what's going on because it's early in the morning. Like, who was here? He came here and then we went inside. The guy, I don't know who it is. He was spanking her. I was just here.
Were you here when it happened, or did you walk up in there and that's how they were?
Yeah, he went upstairs first, and then I went to see what is going on. I left Valerie in the basement, and then when I went upstairs, Brendan was saying, "Police, drop the knife, drop the knife."
So, Brendan's a police officer.
Yeah, he's an officer. He was saying, "Drop
the knife or the gun?"
the gun." Yeah, and Brendan said, "No, police, don't drop the knife." And then he was saying, "I'm gonna kill her, I'm gonna kill her." And I don't know, he started stabbing her. I think Brendan shot him, and he asked me help to shot him too because...
It's okay. You don't have to get it all out right now.
I never saw that before.
When first responders entered the bedroom, they found Christine Banfield suffering from severe stab wounds. And although she is still alive, it is only barely. With that in mind, paramedics wasted no time in rushing her to the hospital. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room is an unknown man, a stranger with multiple gunshot injuries. And sadly, whoever this guy really is, he is pronounced dead at the scene. Now, at the time of this being recorded, officers had no idea who he was, but his name was Joseph Ryan. Supposedly, he was an intruder and someone that the family claims to have never met or seen before. It was in those frantic few minutes that Brendan told the officers that he had no idea who this stranger was, that not only had he never seen his face before, but also couldn't explain why he was in the property. He would also claim that while on his way to work, the au pair called him to say that something was wrong, and so after unexpectedly returning home, that is when he found this man assaulting his wife. And so, to stop it, he shot him. And if all of this is true, then of course it would be tragic, because not only was his wife now in critical condition, but he was forced to shoot another man. However, as detectives took a closer look at the details, like the timing of the calls and everything else going on, well, they realized that this looked less like chaos and more like a deliberate plan. Circling back to all of this body cam footage, sharp detectives were quick to realize that there was no obvious signs of a break-in. There was no shattered glass, no broken door, and no obvious trail. In fact, the house kinda felt like it was just any other weekday morning, just like it was supposed to be. While police, detectives, and paramedics were trying to make sense of what was going on, Brendan was still talking constantly throughout the entire thing. He explained what happened over and over again, and the story sounded the exact same every single time. Kind of like it was maybe rehearsed. Moments later, and when he was in his own ambulance, Brendan then asked the paramedics if he could be with his wife. But the curious thing here is that he doesn't seem too upset or traumatized. And not only does he not argue or resist with officers, but he also repeats the same thing over and over again, that all he was trying to do was help. When finally at the hospital, Brendan then asked the nurse and officer if he could have an update on Christine. And tragically, that is when he was told the horrible news.
Can you have someone check with him again?
Okay. What is the nature of the incident?
Check what?
The status of his wife, ma'am.
Hi, sir. My name is Gina. I'm one of the doctors here. Your wife has died.
Unfortunately, Christine didn't make it. She had died from blood loss. And as you may notice here, that Brendan doesn't scream or wail in disbelief either, and there is no dramatic collapse. Instead, he just drops his head and then starts to cry softly. In fact, even while the doctor was busy explaining important information that he would almost certainly want to hear, he didn't really seem that interested in listening. If anything, he seemed more worried about trying to convince them that he was there to help her.
She died of blood loss. Her airway was actually okay. I'll call the medical examiner, of course, and we'll do an autopsy and make sure we know for certain. But
I was trying to apply pressure.
Yeah. I mean, those were enormous wounds, and you know, it's not.
There were so many.
It's not a survivable injury.
So, if you were to stop watching the video here, you would probably think that this was just a simple yet devastating tragedy. A husband who survived, a wife who didn't, and a stranger who died as a result of his own actions. But unfortunately, it gets a lot worse than this, because once the emergency was over and more seasoned detectives stepped in, well, the plotline to this story took a whole new turn. When they began to look at all of the evidence available, which of course included the body cam footage, phone calls, forensic data, and even text messages, well, they realized something very peculiar, that all of this evidence actually pointed inwards and not outwards. Now, I'm going to break the fourth wall for a moment and just say that I'm pretty sure that many of you have already heard of this case before, but probably pre-trial because it only happened 2 weeks ago. However, if you don't actually know how this story pivots, you're in for a wild ride. In fact, even if you are familiar with this case, I guarantee you that you will likely learn new information in this video. So on that note, let's take a look at who Christine and Brendan were and how they got here. In the aftermath of Christine's death, the news spread fast through Fairfax County. Many of the locals were in disbelief, and officers were ordered to be on heightened alert around Brendan Banfield. Patrol cars would sit idly outside the house with their lights off, and people were keen to know more about Brendan, who, at the time, was known to have been forced to kill the intruder. However, behind the scenes, detectives had already begun their own investigation, and let's just say that, through the replayed calls, the evidence left behind in the home, and all of the messages that they were about to read, they already saw that part of the story did not properly fit together. Because here's the thing, real home invasions often leave a huge mess behind them. Like I've already said to you, you would expect like a broken door or a smashed window to be left behind. Just anything that might have been moved inside the property or some sort of damage on the outside. However, this house, it didn't have any of that at all. The only evidence that detectives could find was actually inside the bedroom that Christine and her intruder had been in. And there's the timing of the phone calls too. Because although the main phone call came in at 8:02 in the morning, a previous one had been made about 15 minutes earlier. But that one would only last for a mere second before then hanging up. So, why exactly had Juliana and Brendan made that initial call, and why would it take them more than 15 minutes after that to call again? Detectives would also begin to examine the smaller details in the house, like where things were placed and what was moved. And that is when they noticed that Christine's phone wasn't exactly where you'd expect it to be. It was turned off and tucked away in the kitchen of all places, something that many of her friends and family would say that she would never do. Now, of course, none of these things would suggest guilt or foul play on their own. However, they were strange. And so, with that in mind, they decided to take a closer look into who Christine and Brendan were. Beginning with Christine, she was a 37-year-old nurse, a devoted wife, and an incredible mother. You can see through all of the photos and videos that she was steady, practical, and deeply compassionate. The kind of person that friends and family would describe as dependable and very lovable. Now, professionally speaking, that fed directly into her work, because Christine was a pediatric intensive care nurse. This meant that she spent most of her day-to-day life working with sick children and scared parents. and as you can imagine, long shifts and high stress were the regular for her. However, that did not matter with Christine, because not only was this her passion, but she deeply cared about those under her wing. Earlier on in her career, Christine had actually trained as a sexual assault forensic nurse examiner, helping victims during some of the worst moments of their lives and collecting evidence while she testified in court, which, tragically, as you will soon come to find out, will make this story even worse. Now, at least from the outside, the Banfield residence looked absolutely immaculate. This is a house that is worth more than $1 million in the suburbs, and was filled with 2 professional adults and a young daughter, which resembled a happy family. The neighbors around them never reported hearing any screaming or fighting either, so it all looked good. Speaking of 2, let's talk about Brendan here. A few years older than Christine, Brendan had previously worked in law enforcement, where procedures, evidence, and, of course, investigations mean everything. And that detail will become very important later on in this video, by the way. At the time, Brendan seemed to be reliable, dependable even. He was the kind of man who knew how to handle himself in a crisis. Now, after meeting in college during their freshman year, the spark between Christine and Brendan would grow into marriage and then eventually a daughter. The 2 really did seem to love one another, and they played the family role very well. However, when detectives later reconstructed their marriage, they would find many small cracks. Dozens of them, actually. And that's because, unfortunately, Brendan's infidelity had been a recurring issue for many years between the 2. Apparently, there were multiple affairs spread across nearly a decade, including hundreds of hidden messages and secret conversations. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that any of this will automatically lead to murder. Plenty of couples survive even worse. However, it does start to paint a picture here that Brendan was not happy with Christine, and also that he wasn't trying to change anything about it either. When detectives realized this, it of course changed almost everything about the story to them, because now this wasn't just some random act of violence anymore, but possibly a husband who had a motive to murder his wife. And the more they learned about his private life and what was going on behind the scenes, let's just say that that image that he had, well, I mean, it wasn't great to begin with anyway, but it would get only worse. And it's right around now that I probably need to introduce you to another person, and a name that you have actually already heard of before. And that's Juliana, the au pair. So, given the family situation, of course that being both Brendan and Christine being hardworking professional adults who also had a daughter, getting a nanny made total sense. With Brendan being an IRS agent and Christine being a full-time nurse, those long days at work would absolutely be a killer. And so, if you have disposable income, then why not? And so, like a lot of families in similar situations, they decided to hire one in 2022. And of course, that is where Juliana came into the picture. So, Juliana was supposed to be someone who lived in the home, helped with childcare, and, in a way, became part of the family. At the time of this going on, she was in her early 20s and had moved from Brazil to the US on a cultural exchange program. And by most accounts, her business relationship with the Banfield family did start normally. She did all the usual things you'd expect from a nanny, including sorting out school runs, babysitting, and cleaning the house. Nothing different or strange yet. However, it was only several months after she moved into the property that boundaries began to shift, and the relationship between her and Brendan started to blur. And by the 10th month, she was in bed with him. Quietly and secretly, Juliana and Brendan maintained a sexual relationship, with Christine still very much in the picture. The relationship wasn't dramatic or romantic or anything like that, at least for a while. Actually, it was quite mundane, and I don't know why, but somehow that makes it even worse. However, the affair did not fizzle out. Instead, it deepened. And the horrifying thing is that Brendan would never actually talk about divorcing Christine or even separating. Instead, he began to talk about a future where she simply did not exist anymore. He would even tell Juliana that not only did he want to marry her instead, but he wanted to have his own children with her. To to start all of this all over again. However, there was one giant non-negotiable for him, that divorce simply was not an option here. Not only was it too messy and expensive for him, but Brendan did not want to lose custody over his daughter. So, instead of imagining a life after Christine, they instead started imagining a life without her. And you can probably guess what I mean by that. It became so obvious that Brendan was obsessed with money, control, custody, and, of course, the fear of splitting the family's assets. His actions were already tearing the family apart, but to take all of this one step further, he did not want to face any of the consequences either. And when detectives decided to search the family home a few months later, well, they found details that made the relationship between Brendan and Juliana even harder to ignore. Because right there, on the bedside table of the master bedroom, was a framed photo of Brendan and Juliana. Not only that, but you could also see that her own clothes were in the master bedroom's closet. Of course, this was evidence that she had now moved from her own bedroom down the hallway and right into the master bedroom with Brendan, and all of this was only a few weeks after Christine had died. Just another side note here, but the furniture and flooring had been replaced too. Now, to seasoned investigators, they realized that this no longer looked like grief, but like total and utter replacement instead. And it was that moment that they stopped looking for a motive, because now they had their answer. So, you could argue that up until this point, everything could still be explained away as just messy human behavior. I mean, you've got an affair, a strained marriage, and of course, plenty of bad decisions. But nothing that explicitly or automatically equals murder. However, as detectives started to dig through phones, laptops, and messages, they realized that the picture that was forming wasn't emotional or impulsive, but organized. One of the many things that detectives will do is use the victim's IP address to see what kind of websites they've been on and who they've been talking to. And that is when they realized that Christine had actually been on a fetish website named FetLife. And it gets worse, but they also realized that there were dozens of users who had messaged her. From the outside, it looked like Christine was trying to organize violent sex with a stranger, where she talked about using knives, restraints, and even pretending that there was no consent. Which, to be honest with you, sounded extremely unfamiliar for Christine, because affairs and violent sex were definitely not her thing. And that's because it wasn't. On the surface, it looked like Christine had organized this herself. Friends and family would say that this did not match her at all. And even stranger, all of her so-called messages only seemed to happen when both Brendan and Juliana were at home with her. Not only that, but when they were away on weekends or Brendan was away on a work trip, the exact kind of times when Christine would probably message people, the account went silent instead. So you can probably understand the reluctance that detectives had when trying to believe this, because it didn't really look like a personal habit, but more like a setup. And that's because, behind Christine's name, Brendan and Juliana were busy trying to find someone that they could use in their plot to have Christine murdered. They were quite smart about all of this too, because they would send messages from Christine's laptop, so that all of the evidence would point directly back to her. Essentially, they were trying to frame a stranger to show up at the family home with a weapon, so the two could then murder both of them. So for a moment, I'd like to shift gears and talk about a fourth person in our case today, and of course that's Joseph Ryan. Because to be honest with you, I don't really agree with how other channels and news sites have portrayed this guy in the long run. It's not really being fair or positive. I mean, in a way, it does kind of make sense though, right? Because the first time that we hear about Joseph is when he apparently is invading the family home, and of course, assaulting Brendan's wife. But as we know, that did not actually happen, and Joseph was set up. So we kind of have to go against this bias that we've built against him and look at him in a whole new light. Now, Joseph was 39 years old at the time of his death. He was living nearby in Virginia and, by all accounts, was a lovely guy. He had no violent background, was passionate about social justice and animals, and was popular in his own friendship groups. Joseph was also into BDSM, which makes sense considering he did have an account on FetLife. FetLife is often used for people trying to find others with similar sexual interests. And, of course, BDSM can most easily be described as bondage and power shifting, though technically it does get more complex than that. The other thing to note here is that he was also heavily into LARP or live-action roleplay, and under the name of Korak, he would often attend LARP events all across the country. Over these weekends, he would reenact wartime events, and even play as his own character as a man who fought others with a rubber fish. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning all of this to you is because it shows that Joseph was not only into sexual power dynamics, but also roleplay, and these were two things that were perfect for both Brendan and Juliana to exploit. Another thing that frustrates me here is that many websites have described Joseph as an incel, but it turns out that he was actually quite the opposite. Throughout his adult life, Joseph had several long-term relationships. He had even talked about his interests with his mother, and had previously explicitly stated that he doesn't like actual violence or knife play in the bedroom. Anyway, I just wanted to mention this because I don't believe that Joseph has been given an appropriate spotlight in the media. Disguised as Christine, they spoke to a lot of guys on FetLife, and in the end, they chose Joseph as their prime target. Now again, a lot of people talk about him as the intruder or the attacker, but Joseph didn't break into any property. He walked into a home that he believed he had an invitation to. He was also told by Christine that she wanted the entire thing to be as realistic as possible, and that she wanted to pretend that the entire thing was not consensual. And so, when Joseph eventually got there, he didn't believe that he was breaking into the property, he believed that he had permission to enter. And so, refocusing on Brendan for a moment here, what he basically wanted Joseph to do was break into the property without Christine's knowledge and then assault her, so that when he and Juliana arrived, they basically had a reason to shoot him. And then, in the frenzy of it all, they could then stab Christine before placing the knife in his hand, so basically they could frame Joseph. All of this was so disgustingly smart and elaborate. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Brendan and Juliana didn't merely talk about it, but they would even visit shooting ranges together, where Brendan taught her how to handle a firearm, how to aim properly, and how to stay steady under pressure. Unfortunately, it wouldn't stop there. Detectives would later find out that while Juliana checked the neighborhood for doorbell and ring cameras, or anything that might capture movement while outside of the house, Brendan would go ahead and make quiet changes inside. The old master bedroom windows were replaced with heavier, more insulated ones that apparently were soundproof from the outside, which of course is just a small and innocent upgrade on paper. However, in hindsight, it felt incredibly deliberate. After selecting Joseph on FetLife, Juliana and Brendan then began to message him and even craft an encounter that sounded both consensual and controlled. He was told that not only would the door be unlocked, but he should also come upstairs, should bring a knife as part of the roleplay, and that she, aka Christine, would be inside and even act frightened and resist as if it were all part of the scenario. So, to Joseph, this wasn't a crime at all. It was a staged fantasy between two consenting adults, which is what makes this part so difficult to sit with, because Joseph didn't walk into that house as an attacker or an unwelcomed guest, but walked in believing that he'd been invited. And at the same time, Christine, who was fully unaware of the entire situation, was being set up to collide with a stranger that she had never even spoke to before. And on February the 24th, 2023, their plan was, unfortunately, ready. Phone records and surveillance footage show Brendan leaving the house that morning, before then traveling in his usual direction towards work. However, instead of heading straight there, he then decided to go to the parking lot of a nearby McDonald's, where he then orders food and even steps inside of the establishment multiple times. It is worth noting that this strange behavior was not part of his usual commute, and to be honest with you, it certainly looked like he was just trying to pass time. Meanwhile, back at the house, house, Juliana stayed with Christine and her daughter. Juliana deliberately unlocked the door that Joseph was planning to use when arriving, and from there, she tried to make herself scarce and let everything unfold. Once Ryan was inside, Juliana remained out of his line of sight, snuck downstairs, and then called Brendan to return home. With Brendan expecting this phone call, he was home within minutes. And then, instead of immediately calling the police or getting everyone outside of the property, he then allegedly moved his daughter downstairs and into the basement. By now, the chaos was already unfolding upstairs between Christine and Joseph, who, to be honest with you, were probably both very uncomfortable with each other. As according to plan, that is when Juliana and Brendan entered the bedroom, with Juliana then allegedly shooting Ryan point blank in the face. Moments later, Brendan then began to stab his own wife to death. Neither of them stood a chance, and Christine must have been so terrified to go from being attacked by a stranger to seeing that stranger get murdered right in front of her to then being murdered herself. What followed after was something that Brendan had orchestrated all along. He then allegedly moved their bodies and the knife around to make it look like Joseph had attacked Christine, and only then did the final call to 911 happen. Oh, and by the way, that previous call that was made 15 minutes earlier was Juliana prematurely calling them before then abruptly hanging up. And of course, what followed was the body cam footage and the beginning to a long and strange investigation. This was not a quick process, by the way. It would take 8 long, grueling months until October of 2023 that police finally arrested Juliana on suspicion of murder. That, of course, would be for shooting Joseph and not stabbing Christine. This news was huge for anyone on the outside, and for some, they couldn't actually believe it was happening. I mean, of course, there were always some people who believed that maybe Juliana and Brendan were actually having an affair in the background. But of course, we always have to take these rumors because, at the end of the day, up until that point in time, they were just rumors with a massive pinch of salt. It's just human nature to speculate, right? But now, well, this was looking real. And then, 1 year later, it was finally Brendan's turn, when he was charged with not 1, but 2 counts of aggravated murder. And with their arrests now finally made public, it gave the general public plenty of reason to hate them, with justification. By the time that Brendan's trial finally began, many people tuned in to listen, of course including me. Juliana and Brendan had a lot to say about each other, and a lot to answer for too. And I'm not gonna lie, one of my guilty pleasures is when 2 evil monsters turn on each other. The state's most important witness was Juliana herself. Months prior to the trial, she actually decided to accept a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Brendan, which of course made her both valuable and controversial.
I asked him if we're going to divorce her. He explained that he was thinking about finding a way to just get rid of her. We told other people before that it was kind of part of the game. She would just get kind of freaked out and try to resist. She was just telling him, let me go, I'm gonna die anyways. I'm gonna bleed to death.
The prosecution framed her as someone who was finally telling the truth, while Brendan's defense framed her as someone who was saying whatever she needed to say to save herself.
2 different people that I called to the stand that essentially confirms that everything changes when she comes in and testifies.
The trial went on for 3 weeks straight, where many of Christine's family attended, but unfortunately, Joseph's mother was too ill to attend. She did, however, promise that she would be there for Brendan's sentencing if he was ever found guilty. And as it turns out, her wishes would eventually come true, because after a mere 9 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury would return with their verdict, where they found Brendan guilty on all major counts. Now, Brendan is still yet to be sentenced, but in Virginia, aggravated murder carries a life sentence. Honestly, he should just be happy that the state no longer carries the death penalty, because this guy, well, after his monstrous actions, he would be an excellent candidate for it.
Case number FE 2024-666, count 4. We, the jury on the issue, joined in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield, defendant, find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder of Joseph Ryan within the same 3-year period during which he did also kill and murder Christine Banfield.
It is no surprise to see that Brendan didn't really react much to the verdict at all. He just kind of did as usual. You know, the schoolboy sniffling and the sad puppy dog eyes. I mean, frankly, this guy absolutely infuriates me, because how can a man like this be so evil? And just like that, folks, it was all over for him. But what about Juliana? Well, her reward for testifying against Brendan was facing the lesser charge of manslaughter, but her sentencing hasn't even been announced yet. So, we will just have to wait and see what happens. Now, of course, when you find a case like this, it is rather easy to focus on the absolutely insane plotline. And it's also easy to forget about what really matters, and that's Christine, Joseph, and Christine's daughter. Christine was a nurse, a mother, and a wife, and her entire being was centered around nurture and care. Not only did she love her own family, but she loved to look after those who were less fortunate. And in the end, all she got in return was betrayal and death. In the aftermath to all of this, her daughter now has to grow up without either parent. Because she didn't lose just one in this story, she lost both. Joseph was used as a prop, labeled as an intruder, and then lost his life for nothing. And in Brendan's and Juliana's eyes, his entire existence was worth less than his divorce. By the way, it turns out that some people actually feel sympathy for Juliana because she may have been manipulated. But honestly, I'm not buying it. When it comes to murder and violence, we all know the difference between right and wrong. And so, at least in my mind, she can go to hell alongside Brendan. As always, my heart sincerely goes out to the families that now have to deal with this reality, and I don't think that there is anything satisfying I can say to close off this case. There is no clever twist or neat resolution. All that we are left with is a family that's been destroyed by Brendan's horrific actions. And now, his daughter has to grow up without either parent. I'm gonna leave it there today, folks, but as always, I'd love to know what you think about this one, because not only was this case heavy, but it's also, unfortunately, notorious. What are your thoughts on Brendan, and do you think Juliana will receive the punishment that she actually deserves? As usual, please share your thoughts in the comment section down below, and thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really do appreciate it. As always, I'll be back again next week, likely with 2 videos this time. Anyway, until that moment arrives, please remember to look after yourselves and, of course, each other. Oh, and if you haven't yet, please check out my podcast. I'd really appreciate that too. It's on Spotify. Anyway, thank you so much, and see you again soon. Take care. Goodbye. There's like a fly right there on the ring light, and he's a little bit obsessed. What is it? You gonna catch it for me? Yeah? What is that? Go get it. Go get it. Yes. Yes, he's got it. He's got it. Oh my god. Maybe again later.